So I am here with Danny. Danny was in a retreat in 2021, so 4 years ago now, a long time. And Danny was a former police officer of 23 years. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And left the career because he was struggling with PTSD and came to psilocybin. So we're going to talk about how he struggled as a police officer, and we're going to get into how he's doing now and the transformation over time. First of all, Danny, thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview with me. You are definitely someone that was really important to me in this work. And when we first met, you were in a really difficult state of being and struggling. And share with us a little bit about what it was like for you at the time before we met.
Sorry. It's been it's been a while since I had to think about that. And you mentioning it reminded me of how awful, how brutal everything felt around me. And yeah, I had been struggling for a while, until I was kind of asked about the retreat. And at that point, I was kind of at my wits' end with everything. I mean, I was, pretty heavily involved in therapy, with a specialist that dealt with military and first responders in particular. So she was a godsend, and she was able to help me retire a little bit early without consequence because of my mental state that had deteriorated to the point that it was scary. I literally thought that I was becoming bipolar or something like that because my mood swings were unbelievable. I had never experienced anything like that in my life. I was totally stoic and solemn one minute. The next, I was ready to start flipping tables over. And then I was inconsolable, all within the span of could be a matter of minutes. I remember one of my first conversations with you on the phone, and even that was difficult because I remember I was having a little bit of trouble kind of holding it together, just trying to talk with you, try to explain to you what was happening, what had been happening, and all of that kind of thing. So it was very humbling, and it was very awful all at the same time.
I know that this is going to be a difficult conversation, but it is a conversation that is important because there's so many people who are in your field and other first responders that are silently suffering. And I really want people to know that there is something out there that could help them. And I know as a former paramedic myself, the culture is very difficult to share that you're struggling with your emotional health. And so for people that are listening and or watching this, what were your symptoms and how long did you struggle before you recognized that you needed help?
I started seeing my therapist in January of 20. Probably a good 6 or more months prior to that was when I started having onsets, and I had been in the profession for so long that you just didn't say anything. I didn't even realize that I was really starting to have the problems that I was having mentally and emotionally. And I remember I joked about it. I made jokes like we did that intense scenes, dead body calls, whatever. We always had jokes for something. It was how we coped. I remember, yeah, just a couple of weeks probably before I started seeing her, that I really had a real break. Kind of lost my temper in certain respects in front of, at that time, my wife and our collective kids, and that was kind of the final straw. I realized, this is really scary. There's really something wrong, and I don't know what to do. I was completely terrified as to what was going on in my head and in my mind, my body, my emotions, and it was a very slow and arduous process. And I had to work a little bit after that, and every day was as much of a mental struggle as you could even imagine. I had to mentally prepare in a used to be a good way. Now it was just to try to get through the day without something awful happening with me in my head, being able to do my job, being able to, just walking on eggshells, I guess is what it felt like. And it was, each day was even harder than the one before for the most part. I started therapy, and I started going twice a week almost immediately. It eventually evolved into a group therapy with a couple of other academy mates who had also respectively retired from different agencies, um, and so it was mentally and emotionally taxing all the time because it never went away. One of my coping mechanisms was I started to drink a lot because it would lessen the pain until it didn't. And I was still doing everything I could, to keep myself physically fit and everything else like I had done in my career. Um, but then there was always room to drink. And again, it was more of just a release. I didn't get violent. It just felt good to not feel anything.
Wow. Did you recognize that this was related to your career, or was there like one specific experience that you had that really affected you, or would you say that this was just a accumulation over time?
I think a little bit of both, but ultimately just a snowball effect. The final straw in hindsight, after lots of therapy and lots of discussion, was something I couldn't even talk about for the longest time, was my last critical incident that I responded to. I was second on scene to a double homicide of two elderly people that were very highly respected in the community, known as very giving, loving people, had extended family here in the area. And so ultimately, that wound up being the proverbial straw, so to speak, in hindsight. At the time, I didn't really realize it. That was kind of when it started, and it wasn't like an avalanche. It was just slowly starting to realize, I wasn't sleeping as well. I was, having some issues at work and trying to stay focused and trying to control my emotions and it kind of seemed like once it started, it wasn't stopping. And so then that's where started making jokes about it. I must be going crazy. Oh, losing my marbles, whatever. And I really didn't take it all that seriously in spite of how I was feeling, because I had been doing the job for that long that I had never had any kind of issues of being bothered by something that I saw or that I experienced or that I was a part of or whatever, in a professional capacity. And then it just kind of unwound, again, coming up around that next the end of that year is when it really just collapsed on me.
And I feel like, you know, because there's not so much real awareness around the fact that this is very common for a lot of people who are working in the field of like being a first responder. but yet it's not really safe to 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 share that, maybe you're struggling with your mental health, like you said. Like, I think that a lot of people will just use humor as a way to cope with it.
You know,
Do you feel like you felt safe to share how you were feeling and like to be open about it, or did you feel like you would be judged? Because I think when we go into the world in that in that job, there's almost this expectation that you're supposed to put this suit of armor on and that you're just a superhuman that doesn't feel anything, and that you're weak if you show any kind of um inability to do the job, or weaken your mind. And I think that that is a lot of fear, like a big fear that people have about sharing that they're struggling. Would you agree?
yeah. I came from a different generation, as far as where I think that kids, especially in my generation, that grew up the way that I did or that we did, however you want to say it, were just kind of cut from a different cloth. You didn't really talk about anything, not because you were embarrassed or ashamed, but just because it just wasn't how things went. And then going into my profession, um, I don't remember any kind of debrief where it was like, "Hey, is everybody okay?" That was pretty intense, or whatever it was. It was always a debrief of how we could have done things better and who screwed up on what and what could have happened but didn't, and food for fodder for next time. Which at the time, being still fairly, I guess, about maybe almost midway through my career, that was my mindset. You know, um, being on SWAT, you just were mentally tough. You had to be, and that was, right, wrong, or indifferent. That was my persona, and I didn't have any problems with it. I wasn't an addict. I would drink every now and again. And as I had mentioned, I always took really good care of myself physically because that was, part of what you needed to do. You needed to expect to be your very best self physically, mentally, and emotionally because your life depended on it, literally and figuratively. I think I had mentioned to a friend of mine in confidence, that kind of just in passing, something to the effect of, yeah, I had a little bit of trouble sleeping there for a minute, ha ha kind of deal, and didn't think anything of it. Well, not too long after that, I get a tap on the shoulder and I wind up in a fitness for duty interview with the psychologist. And I was livid, absolutely livid. And I kind of went in there and just kind of told him, hey, I don't know who reported this. I don't know who said what, but I'm fine. I don't know what's happening. So wound up working out for me, and they cut me loose and put me back, on duty and everything else. But I just never forgot that.
What did it make you feel like when you got pulled in with the psychologist?
It pissed me off because it was something, like I said, that I had said in confidence that obviously somebody else overheard and said something that took it as a literal kind of like, whoa, we might want to check this guy. He might be losing it. And it was just more of a passing comment because, like I said, I had never had any issues like that. And the one time that I just happened to mention something, in my opinion, mentioned something very casual and again in passing, turned out to be, you know, kind of a mess for me.
Yeah.
And so, thank goodness I hadn't ever felt like I needed to talk to somebody or whatever. But I did notice that as time went on, it kind of seemed like the agency or whomever started to place a little bit more emphasis on making sure your people are okay. And I can remember the night of that last incident I had mentioned with the double homicide. Me and my partner that was first on scene were doing our reports, and I remember somebody from one of the CISM, critical incident stress management people had come in and had asked, hey, you guys okay? Like, yeah, good. What's up? And it was just bizarre because that was still somewhat new to me and very unexpected. But slowly started to move the pendulum, I think, more toward the focus on is everybody okay? And I know by the time that I was coming to the twilight of my career that I had a little bit more trouble holding my tongue in briefing, when if it regarded one of my comrades, as far as dealing with something the night before. And I remember one in particular that it was actually my call, but I had been dispatched with another person to another high priority call that we were, going lights and sirens to at the exact same moment that this other one had come out, and it wound up being a young teenager that had committed suicide in his dad's office.
Mhm.
And one of the guys that wound up going to that lived in the area. So the next day, they kind of went over it, and it was a pretty hectic deal, and obviously very traumatic, for the parents and siblings. And I remember just kind of out of nowhere, I was like, "Did anybody check on him? Is he okay?" He walked in on something that should have been my deal, but then he got stuck with it. So there was also a tremendous sense of guilt on my part already at that time, which I didn't know, because I knew that I was not doing well, and he was quite a bit younger than me, and as far as career goes. And so I started to worry because he was also, a friend. He was one of my trainees, and so I was immediately concerned for him. Did anybody check on him? How is he doing? That's something you can't unsee. What's normal to us isn't normal to people. So it was just things like that that I started to notice, where I started to get almost a little bit more offensive about critical incidents, even if I was not involved, nowhere near. I could have been on my days off, but just like, anybody check on him? Everybody okay?
I think that's an important point that you're making, because as a police officer, it's not just your responsibility to go to the call for civilians. You also have other people that you are responsible for. Like, as a senior officer, you are responsible for the younger coworkers as well as like the family, so
Mhm.
you're taking on this tremendous stress on your shoulders. And when you are being made to feel like you're not adequate, of course you're going to internalize that. And then you know yourself that you need to start taking care of your mental health, right? Because you were recognizing it at that point. And then it's just this, like you said, like it's the snowball effect. And it's a huge responsibility. And the beautiful thing is that you finally found a solution, because you came to retreat and you experienced psilocybin therapy, which, for those that don't know, is a psychedelic. And without actually having a psychedelic experience, it it shifted your life for the better. So do you want to share a little bit about how you came to psilocybin?
Yeah. Like I said, I had been enjoying my beer a lot, and still, totally immersed in therapy, and it just wasn't enough. I was doing better, I guess, in in certain terms, but it's almost like I was missing something, like I wasn't quite connecting back to, I guess, as normal of a reality as I could. My partner that I ended up going with, who had introduced it to me. And I remember just kind of being like, yeah, I don't know about that. I was a cop for 23 years, and it's illegal. Drugs are bad, all that stuff, because I was still just in that mindset. And she kind of kept chipping away at me, and she'd pull something up on a website and have me read an article or whatever. And then I finally went to her and was like, okay, all right, let's do it. I'm at the end of my rope, and I've been hanging on way too long, and I need something, or this may not end well for me.
At this point, you'd already retired as a police officer. Is that correct?
Yes. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
you were still dealing with the residual effects of your mental health.
Very much. Very much so. She was, I think, as in much pain as I was. And again, having been academy mates, it was painful to witness her pain. We were supposed to be able to solve problems all the time. We were supposed to be able to figure stuff out all the time. And that spills over into your personal life. And not being able to help her was excruciating. And I know she felt the same way in regards to me. I told her, I said, this is kind of like my last hurrah, I guess, in a sense. And not like I was, talking about ending it or doing anything drastic like that, but I was just kind of out of options. Yeah. So she's like, okay, like, well, let's do it. And that was it. So I was like, all right, well, we're jumping in with both feet. So let's see where it takes us.
So you didn't know anything about psilocybin prior to coming. You were just trusting her
Hmm.
guidance at that point.
Yes.
Okay, you
Yes.
didn't do any research. And so coming into the retreat, I could see your struggle. It was very evident, and how triggered you were. You were triggered by even being around other people.
Hmm.
And I remember one particular experience in the car when you lost your phone. And I was worried for you because you were going into like a bit of a rage. And and then over the course of the week, so we spent 7 days together. You did 3 ceremonies, and I saw your change, like your ability to have more compassion for others. Not that you didn't, but I think you had been so burned out that you lost it, and that you were. I remember one particular situation you said, I noticed this person got into my personal space, and in the past I would have lost it. But I actually thought to myself, well, maybe they're just from another culture, and maybe that's just they don't have the same boundaries as we do. Do you want to speak to your experience and your progression through the retreat?
Yeah. And I remember the phone thing and was ready to really lose my mind. And I know that as the days kind of went on and we went to, you took us to the cenotes and just with our therapy and with our interactions, I noticed, and I know that it was brought to my attention that I ultimately got over that incident fairly quickly, I guess, in comparison to what it may have been had I been back in my normal society, I guess. And it was just extremely relaxing. It was very comfortable. You were very comforting to the both of us. I know that because we had spoken about it at length. And that with the ceremonies, it opened up a, a door that I didn't know was possible in a good way. And the relief that I felt, and I was able to kind of reflect on things. And I still journal, like I did when we were with you. And I know I started kind of drawing again, which was bizarre because I hadn't done that since I was a kid. And it was somewhat subtle, but at the same time, it was almost overwhelmingly amazing and exciting because I felt like maybe I was able to truly look at things differently and to feel differently. And it was the largest relief that I can even think of. The nightmares and the triggers and just everything that was around me that was gone, and that it was indescribable. I mean, it was amazing when it was all said and done.
So, I mean, your experience was very unique because you actually didn't have a psychedelic trip. Like you didn't have any hallucinations or memories or flashbacks into anything, or like the only insights you had were when you were out of the medicine. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It was kind of like they worked in conjunction, I guess, if I'm going to try to be, layman about it, but um, that somehow everything mixed together with the ceremonies ultimately was able to help me to, I guess, perceive things differently, to feel a little bit differently, to feel positively about something, which I hadn't in a really long time. I think it was just the right fit for exactly what I needed at that time. And that is something that I still hold very sacredly in my mind because of what it did for me.
Well, in a way, it saved your life. Like psilocybin was the catalyst to this new version of you, who 4 years later you still exist as today.
Yeah.
And when I think about what you're sharing, just so people are aware, when we do psilocybin therapy in a retreat setting, we're using modalities like meditation, shadow work. And shadow work, for those that don't know, is a lot around acceptance of the self. And I think for you, Danny, you really struggled with loving yourself, with having compassion and empathy for yourself. And that shifted. By the end, you could see yourself through this other lens. And I think that in itself is so profound, and it allows you to let go of that guilt and that shame of, maybe not being that invincible warrior that you were trying to be, or that you were taught to be and suppress all of your feelings. You were always this person, but you felt safe to be able to be you and to connect with, your inner child again through your expression in art. And journaling has been a really, obviously, a very positive um outlet for you to be able to express yourself. And you've been ongoing therapy as well, in
Hmm.
addition to, doing the retreat. And so in total, you did the 3 ceremonies. And since then, would you say that you've reverted back to any of those feelings at any point in 4 years?
To the feelings that I had prior, the
Yeah.
negative.
Yeah.
Overall, no. I mean, you know, anybody's respective journeys are always going to have demons, but as a whole, it's been it's been like night and day. I my anxiety levels have gone way down. They still kind of hit me every now and again, but again, it's just nature of the beast. It is what it is. It seems much more manageable. It's much more recognizable to me. If I can feel something coming on, I know that I need to extract myself from wherever I'm at, to go have a minute, to sit down, to breathe, to pray, to meditate, whatever you want to call it. And it's been much easier, as opposed to me just completely coming off the rails, like what would have happened before, just in a heartbeat. It's just more comforting, I guess, knowing what I had gone through, and just, being my own worst critic, which a lot of people in our respective professions are, perfectionists, and
Mhm.
there's no such thing, so it's definitely been a journey.
It's amazing that it's, turned out like this for you, and that you've come to these realizations, and that the shifts have lasted this long. I mean, a lot of the studies say 1 to 3 years. Well, you're on year 4. And just for people's reference, psilocybin actually helps to change how the brain fires. So when you're in the state of PTSD, and you're having those nightmares, or those experiences, or maybe there's triggers from, say, like a siren or whatever your trigger would be, it's almost like those things aren't going to take your brain down that same loop and with the same emotional attachment. What ends up happening is it's creating these new pathways in the brain. So then you can see your life from a different lens, but you can also now show up in your life differently and feel differently moving forward. And so for you, it sounds like that's exactly what happened because, sometimes people will get insights from the actual psychedelic experience, but in your case, you didn't have that. You just felt the difference. You just felt the shift that was happening in your mind. And, I'm so grateful to you to be so open and vulnerable and have this conversation because I know it's very, very difficult for people to be open about this, and especially in like professions like police, fire, paramedics, to
Hmm.
talk about mental health openly, because the reality is that we have to take care of our mental health. And without your mind, like, how can you show up for anyone else if you're not taking care of you? And so for somebody that might be silently struggling with some type of mental health and is as a police officer or first responder, like, what would you like to say as a senior officer?
If any of your help is an option to whoever might be in that predicament, I would absolutely say 100% do it, because I was pretty adamant against all of that. I think, again, just because we were cultured that way. Somebody watching this is, maybe it's going to, tip the scale for them in the positive, in the way of, yeah, okay, I'll look into it, I'll do it, whatever it's going to be. I would implore anyone, especially in our line of work, to explore it, to at the very least open your mind to it, because it's not about hippie phase of Woodstock or something like that. That it's a very positive and controlled environment, and that it's a meditation. I wouldn't say it's going to be the end all be all, but if it does just in a fraction that it did for me, I would jump in with both feet. And I just really, really hope that, that this can help. I got a little quivery at first, and I think it was just because I can definitely remember how intense and how difficult that period of my life was. And I can look back on it now and realize, man, thank God that I found this. I would encourage anybody, even remotely thinking about this, whether they think they need it or they're where I was, just kind of like, well, this is bad, this is not going to end well, to just jump on board and do it.
Yeah, I really appreciate that because I know that there's a lot of people who have fear around psychedelic therapy. Their fears are, you know, around having a bad experience, especially if you've seen a lot in your career. And obviously, what you have to go through in a short period of time, 4 to 7 hours of one ceremony versus a lifetime of feeling how you were feeling. I mean, it's a small price to pay for the long-term benefits which you're experiencing now. And what are your views now, do you think, on this idea of psilocybin being a drug as a former police officer?
A drug in a productive way is how I see it. And, there's always going to be naysayers, there's always going to be the critics, but I never would have thought in a million years that that would have ultimately been something that could have been so amazingly helpful to me. And I still dose every few days, and I try to keep that mental aspect when I do dose, about the best form of myself, being my best self.
So
And
you're still microdosing.
mhm,
Okay.
I
And
am.
and have you ever stopped the microdosing at any point?
No,
No? Okay.
no.
Okay.
I got back, and I I guess maybe there was a part of me that was kind of afraid of what might happen if I just quit. I had mentioned there's still times when I feel a little bit of a trigger. I hear fireworks. That still is a little difficult for me at times, but it's not nearly the reaction that it would have been. It's like I can accept it, and it's just, again, just nature of the beast. But overall, that my mindset is better. And just on a little bit of a side note, I had over the past several months, I kind of reconnected with my faith as well. And so I'm also reading scripture, I'm going to fellowship on top of everything else. And, in spite of everything, I have no complaints. It's good. Again, about the emotions and stuff, it's just strong. I guess I'm not that strong to where I can just stifle them and just pretend like nothing affects me anymore. But that was a very, very horrible time in my life.
When you're in it, it's almost like you don't recognize that you're in it because it becomes your normal. And
Hmm.
then you have this contrast now of how you feel, and you look back and you're like, wow, like that was really difficult. And you made it through it to the other side, which is really beautiful. And for those of you that don't know much about microdosing works on the same receptors as an antidepressant in the brain. And so I mean, Danny, if you stopped microdosing, I can almost guarantee you wouldn't revert back. I have a lot of clients that I've worked with that have been through extreme depression, anxiety, or PTSD who stopped microdosing, and they still feel the effects of the retreat. But I understand where you're coming from, and I'm glad that you have that as something that right now for you is making you feel comfortable. But I would encourage you to try in the future to maybe to see how it goes. At least that's always there for you.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
yeah,
Oh, and I'm actually coming kind of near the end of what I have left, and I had actually just thought about that probably the other day. That yeah, I think when I'm out of this, I'm gonna run free, and just believe that it's just gonna still be there. That it's done good things in my mind, and that I'm as confident as anything that I think I'll be good. So yeah, I'm gonna try that when I run out of my medicine here.
yeah. Well, I would love to follow up with you and see how you're feeling after that.
Yeah,
Well, thank you so much
yeah,
for being open, for being vulnerable, for sharing, because I know for a fact that this is going to help somebody out there who is quietly suffering, and hopefully giving them the confidence to really take it more seriously before it comes to the point that it did for you, where it was a snowball effect. And maybe seeking options like psilocybin therapy, which more and more, because you're based out of the US, is becoming more accepted. I mean, I just read that Colorado is now going to be, I think, organizing facilitators for psilocybin therapy. And I think there's some other states that are starting to really look at this as a real treatment. I'm currently affiliated with the Imperial College of London in the UK, and they have an entire psychedelic wing of the university that is doing this research
mm,
on addictions, on mental health, and the long-term effects of psychedelics. And so you are a true testament to that. And so I'm just so grateful that you're here and you're open to have this conversation with me. It's always
hmm,
really good to see you again. And
you too.
yeah,
Yep. No, and I just like I said, I hope it will tip the scale for somebody in a good way. Maybe this was all that particular person or people needed to hear, and they're like, okay, why not?
yeah, no, for sure. And thank you for sharing that wisdom from your own experience.